Good evening and welcome to you all. My name is Jan Landro. I'm the leader of Norwegian Penn, Western Branch. The case of Julian Assange is so full of paradoxes, strange incidents, unanswered questions, and double standards, in addition to principal matters of fundamental importance, that the Bergen House of Literature and Norwegian Penn, Western Branch, are delighted to welcome John Shipton, Julian's father, and Wikileaks editor Kristinn Hrafnsson to this talk. We hope that our international guests, in conversation with Professor Gisle Selnes, a staunch advocate for the imprisoned whistleblower and journalist, will enlighten us as to the present state of his extradition case in England and the further implications and consequences of this manhunt that has gone on for so long. After the talk, we'll open for Q&As. Please, the floor is yours, gentlemen.
Thank you. Is this on? Yes, it's on. Thank you, Jan, for the introduction. I am really happy to be allowed to share this podium with John Shipton and Kristinn Hrafnsson, who both know the case perhaps better than any other person, at least in Norway and perhaps in the world. We are going to try to get a better grasp of what is actually going on in this case. It is often said that this is a complicated case, and in one sense it is. There are many legal subtleties. There's a whole jungle or labyrinth of paragraphs, etc. But on the other hand, it seems quite simple. It has two sides. It has a human or humanitarian side, and then it has a political side as well. You could also say, well, it has a legal side, but I think we could agree that the legal side is already dominated or invested heavily with politics. So we'll try to shed some light from these two perspectives, the humanitarian side and the legal political side. But let's start with you, John. Could you tell us about Julian Assange, your son's condition as we speak during, well, how has it been during the last 3 years? He's been locked up in a high security prison since 2019, and we know that he's suffering both physically and mentally from the treatment he has gone through, he has been put to. How does he react to this? Is he able to cope with it?
Well, as you can imagine, your question is a very good one, but it's not something that is, makes one happy to talk about. So, upon first going into the prison, Julian became quite depressed. As we all know, the evidence came out in the hearing back in September, August, a 3-week hearing, the last week of which was completely devoted to Julian's well-being, either physically and psychologically. So it's a public document that the circumstances in the jail were further conducive and structured so deliberately by the Crown Prosecuting Service, further conducive to the reduction of Julian's well-being. When I say further conducive, Nils Melzer's report, the United Nations the Rapporteur on Torture, his report came out in the end of 2019, and it demonstrates that Julian suffered many years of psychological torture, and divided that up into 3 parts. One is smearing, so there is constant smearing of Julian by senior politicians and by newspapers that were once felt the benefit of Wikileaks' revelations in their sales. They turned upon Julian and in service of the state gradually ruined Julian's public reputation. But despite that, and that went on for 10 years, let me tell you, day in, day out, despite that, the underlay of support from the public and the gratitude felt by the public to Julian remained undisturbed. And we can see as Kristinn and myself and Stella and others travel around the world building upon that firm foundation support. So we have support in every Western parliament. And I describe that, the support in the Western parliaments, as the tip of an iceberg. And that iceberg is us, you here, and many people around the world. So that one part of something that retained its integrity and substance. Julian's physical well-being is, not the best, because now, if you're under stress for 13 years, the Julian cell is 6 square meters and has a slot, like that, and if you sort of get down, you can see the sky. So those circumstances, and it's endless. You see just the other day that Julian is faced with, it looks like, another 2 years of appeals. When I say it looks like, that is a psychological burden in itself. You never know when it's going to stop. You never know when the government or the Crown Prosecuting Service or the governor of a jail is going to make another little irritating law or hurdle for Julian to cross. So, for example, Stella and Julian wish to marry. This is sort of wonderful, really. It's you see, despite the circumstances, love can flourish. But the jail said, oh no, you can't marry in the church, you have to marry somewhere, in the chapel, the prison chapel. And then in the first place, they applied to marry, and the prison governor says, no, you can't do that. And the Minister for Justice says, no, you can't do that. So they threatened to take them to court. They would have been flogged merciless in court. So they said, oh, okay, you can marry. But what about, so those little hurdles after 13 years amount to a ceaseless, stressful psychological torture. So that's the 2 aspects. Rather long answer, but I just want to give you the feel that it's ceaseless, endless, with no expectation of relief.
Could you just give a brief description of this prison we're talking about, the high security, Her Majesty's Prison Belmarsh?
Yes.
Because it's rather extraordinary.
Yes, it's a maximum security prison built for housing terrorists at the beginning of the war on terror. It has huge walls you've seen in the pictures outside, and to get in, first of all, you have to be issued with something and take everything out of your pockets. You're allowed to take £20 maximum in to buy something for Julian. You go in and you stand in a queue and you're given a piece of paper. You take that piece of paper to poke it through a hole in a piece of glass. They examine it, stamp it, and then you go to another place and stand in that queue. The door opens, it's a double airlock, you go in there. You stand in there for a minute, the other door opens, you go down, you take off your boots, belts, your coat, everything like that, put them in an X-ray machine, and then you personally search with a wand, then you go to the next section, and then you personally pat it down, you get dressed again, then you go into another double lock. You go through that double lock, you go walk across a courtyard, you go into another double lock. There they take your piece of paper from you, they open the door, then you stand in a queue, 6 people maximum, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then they search you with a dog to see that you haven't brought drugs in. Then they open the door, and then you go in and you see all the prisoners, and they say, Julian's at number 6. And you go over to number 6, there'll be 3 seats, and there'll be Julian. And Julian's not allowed to sit anywhere in those 3 seats except in the nominated seat. Well, that's the circumstance. Above your head, there's high-fidelity cameras, high-fidelity recording equipment, and always, then they're in one of those domes, and also there's every 3 meters, there's another high-fidelity camera and recording equipment. That's the circumstance.
And to put the question very simple, what has Julian Assange done to get there?
Yeah, that's a good question. You talked in your opening about the complexity of the case, which sometimes it seems that is deliberately being presented as something. But that is a facade, and it has to be understood that part of the procedure actually to break him down, to attack him, is to create this facade that this is it's a legal process. It's not. It is a process of torture where lawfare is used against him. And I have spent so many days in courtrooms in the UK in the last 10 years where it has become absolutely obvious. I want to add a little bit. I just went back in my mind into the visits in Belmarsh prison when John was speaking. It is one of the most horrible experiences I've had. Apart from what he explained is that you have to open your mouth and stick out your tongue. When sitting down, I mean, the process of getting in there almost takes an hour. I have been when I was working as a journalist before joining Wikileaks, I was in prison. I've even been to American prison. This is the worst I've ever experienced. And when you sit down, the acoustics in the room is so bad that you have to raise your voice. You can barely hear, but you cannot move from the seats. The seats are bolted down, they are so heavy, so you have to lean over to try to almost scream across the table, which is also bolted down. And it's almost impossible to have a comfortable conversation. So everything is made as difficult as possible. And the worst thing about it, this is a prison. Sorry, I'll get to your question later, but it's important to describe this so people understand that this is a prison for terrorists, for murderers, and the most horrible criminals. And you have there a journalist who is innocent, who has not been convicted of anything. And he is actually treated worse than the terrorists. That is one aspect of it. The terrorists have a schedule. They know their rights. They have lawyers, so they have a framework within the prison. And there is some flexibility. In Julian's case, they went as much to the book. And you know, when you do that, that is an extra punishment. And I'll give you one example, because, try to think about this. You have a court case ahead of you
where the future of your life is going to be decided. There are thousands and thousands of legal documents that you have to go through. Again and again, for months on end, Julian and his lawyers asked that he would get a computer, not connected to anything, to the internet, a reading computer, so he could get his documents in PDFs electronically. It took almost a year to get him that computer. But absolutely, they decided to go the extra length of using superglue to glue down the keyboard to make sure that he couldn't use it to take notes. Can you imagine that? I mean, so it's just one example that in the entire process, they will go an extra length to torture him. And it is outrageous. Why is he there? He is there simply because he has done the most fantastic work of journalism that anybody has done, at least in my time. As an individual, as a creator of an organization, as a creator of an idea that revolutionized journalism. It's for bringing forth the truth to the general public about war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, the truth about the torturous conditions in Guantanamo Bay, and bringing the truth to people. That is the crime. Everything else, and they have had such a trouble in trying to bring forth a facade of legality that they, even in the indictment against him, when they saw that there were so many holes in it, I mean, overall, it's on 175 years in prison that he could be faced if brought to the US. But it's a blanket equation of journalism to espionage, where they say that practicing journalism is a violation of the Espionage Act of 1918, which was actually created and very disputed in the US during the First World War because of worries that it might be used or misused against journalists. That was a debate in the Congress in the US at the time. And it was dormant for decades. It was used, they attempted to use it against Daniel Ellsberg, who was the whistleblower who brought forth the Vietnam papers and exposing the war in Vietnam. After that, it wasn't used until in the Obama era, where they attempted to use this Espionage Act against whistleblowers. And under Obama, which many were celebrated, even in Oslo, as a hero of freedom and the guy who actually campaigned on press freedom issues. And you can find on the internet when he was campaigning how he was celebrating whistleblowers. Under Obama, more whistleblowers were prosecuted under the Espionage Act than under all presidents combined before him since 1918. So that is the reality. And we always had at the time, next they'll go for the journalists. And Julian is the first, but he will not be the last. And they tried to amend this because, I mean, there was what they considered a First Amendment issues or problems. I mean, they considered it a problem. I mean, yes, we might have to get into a problem with civil society that they say this is an attack on the First Amendment, the freedom of the press. So they threw in something called a hacking charge, which is not even hacking charge at all. It is presented as a hacking charge, even on the website of the Justice Department. Which is calling it a crime, what they say is the communication between the journalist and the source. A very natural communication, but they call it co-conspiracy. And if that's taken to any length, anybody who speaks to a source and has interaction, he can be prosecuted for being a co-conspirator to a crime. If the source does anything illegal to acquire documents or information, which most whistleblowers have to do when they're serving a higher ideal and the interest of the public. So, and I'll give you an example from the indictment, which I always think is so absurd that it sticks out. They claim that in a conversation that they have a copy of where on the one end is Chelsea Manning, and on the other is Julian. They can't even confirm that, and that's the allegation. In the conversation, Manning says, "I think I'm dry." And the reply on the other end, allegedly Julian, is, in my experience, curious eyes never run dry, end quote. On the basis of this quote, in my experience, curious eyes never run dry, they say, that's the proof of conspiracy. On that basis, and again in the indictment, they refer to the curious eyes never run dry comment. It's for me as a journalist for 20 years before joining WikiLeaks, what on earth is going on? How on earth can they present it? We should put this on a T-shirt. Every journalist should wear this about curious eyes never run dry. I mean, that's exactly what should be the motto of journalists. But calling this a conspiracy shows how thin the case was, and they knew it. They knew it was so thin that they had to upgrade the indictment in the middle of the process because of COVID. There was a separation from the beginning to the process that was continued, 7 months later. In the meantime, they upgraded the indictment and were allowed to do so, and threw in all kinds of allegation. It was basically window dressing, PR. Everybody knew it. Everybody said, why on earth are they allowed to do that? How can you change the indictment in the middle of the process? That's one of the hundreds of illegality and the violations of Julian in the process, which will forever be an example that is so shameful for our Western countries. It is the repetition of the Dreyfus case, but it's even much worse than the Dreyfus case in France.
But how do they get to these 175 years? How can they press charges against him that add up to this ridiculous number?
That's by adding together. I mean, in America, you can actually just add together. This is a violation. The collateral murder video. It's a violation of the Espionage Act. The Iraq war logs, etc. So you have this 17 violations, and each and every one carries a 10-year penalty. So that's 170 years. And then the so-called hacking charge, this ridiculous charge, is 5 years. So you got 175 years. And actually, you could extend the 5-year one under certain circumstances to 180 years. So, I mean, this is the justice system. This is what he is facing in the so-called justice system, as I refer to it these days.
We have called this conversation the Assange case an update. And you mentioned the wedding, which is going to take place within just 2 weeks, I think.
On the 23rd.
Yeah.
On the 23rd.
Well, so that will be a tiny beam of light. Yeah. But well, so that means I suppose that everybody here knows who Stella Morris is, his fiancée and wife-to-be. So, well, there has been some light in his asylum and in his prison years. But how do you see the future, if we take it from that perspective? How could it be possible to get Julian Assange out of jail? Would that be by legal means, by taking the court case to its end, or political pressure, or what are the possibilities here?
The law professor said to me the other day that the law these days is in a moment of transition. So what's legal and what's illegal is changing before our eyes. And in the case of Julian, you can see that there's no law that hasn't been abridged in Julian's case. In very, very important areas. Well, what do I see unfolding is that the populations are so offended by this persecution that it's becoming more and more difficult for the United Kingdom to extradite Julian Assange. Just briefly, I'll divide it into two parts to make it. One part is just factual. So, for example, in the Greek Parliament, there's 300 parliamentarians, 90 of them are in the Assange group. There's 40 in the 40 deputies, cross-party in the French National Assembly. Just a month ago, they had a 1-hour debate in the French National Assembly about giving Julian Assange asylum. This is the first case of a National Assembly or Parliament in the West spending time debating the Assange matter. The first parliament to form an Assange group was the Australian Parliament. There's over 100 in Brazil, in the Brazilian Parliament, and so right through South America. Presidents and ex-presidents offer Julian their support, and they write to me and say, "We are your allies," in the same as in Europe. So you can see in your parliament there are 10 parliamentarians in the Assange group, and that phenomenon continues right across Europe, and it goes up to the MEPs, and there's a cross-party group in the European Parliament. And then the next level, the Council of Europe has issued a declaration of support of Julian Assange. Then the next level, the leader of the Council of Europe, he was at our talk yesterday, he offered his support. And then go to the next level, the chairwoman, I think it's called, of the Human Rights Commission of the Council of Europe has offered her support. The Foreign Ministry and the President of Austria has offered their support. So you can see that there's an entire phalanx of support right across Europe and moving into America now. That's one. To make it human and grab hold of the heart, I will try now and reach into this bag of all of the events that WikiLeaks published and draw out a couple of examples and shake them to see what falls out and whether it affects the heart or not. This one particular one is a cable concerning a group of American soldiers outside Baghdad smashing down the door of a house and murdering all of the occupants. All of them, the mother, father, extended family, uncles, aunties, children, grandfather. Murdered them all. And then thinking that they would get into trouble, some sort of trouble for this crime, they ordered in an airstrike on that house and obliterated the earthly remains of that family forever. Now, this is in a cable. At that time, Iraq is a destroyed country. Gideon Polyer, an Australian academic in Melbourne, who specialises in calculating excess deaths, calculated that the 20-year period of the United States invasion of Middle Eastern countries had the direct result of 6 million deaths. 6 million direct deaths. Now, to make that real, we'll continue the story of this little family. So the parliamentarians of this ruined country read the cable, read this cable. It's still on Wikileaks' site. You have a look. They read the cable and somehow conjured up the courage through a moment of, well, let's say magic. Conjured up the courage, a ruined country, wars here, no electricity most of the day. The women have to go down to the street and pick up the water in buckets and save it, and so on. Completely ruined. They got the courage and declared to the United States that we will not sign the Status of Forces Agreement founded on this cable. We will not sign that agreement and remove your troops from our country. And the troops, the United States troops and its allies, removed their troops from Iraq. So one cable out of, well, Kristinn will know, let's say, I don't remember, 95,000 cables. One cable brought the end of a war. There are many other incidents like that I can relate, but one profound example that WikiLeaks, Julian, Chelsea Manning, brought about the end of a heinous, illegal war which had destroyed the lives of 1 million Iraqi citizens, people, mothers and fathers, and had created, according to Brown University, 36 million refugees which wander the world looking for a home, looking for somewhere where they can feed their children and do some work to earn some money. One cable out of 95,000 ended the war. So take that to heart, that the fight for Julian's freedom, that fight gives meaning to his support, your support, gives real meaning to being here tonight. Because you can see just one cable, and there are many others that I can give you example, has created the circumstance to end a war. Anyway.
So that by changing the public opinion and put pressure on, well, the legal system and the politicians of the United States and Britain, would that be the way to
one, you know, it's a rough game that it's a really rough game that Kristinn and I are in. There is no legal system in relationship to Julian Assange. Every time they manipulate it and contort it. Just the other day, they said the Julian's appeared before 21 judges in the United Kingdom, the majority of which are from superior courts. You know, not magistrates who don't know, who don't know the law really well or don't have the courage or don't have the backing of circumstance. But superior court judges, Supreme Court and High Court. There isn't any law that you can found a defence upon because they simply change it. 3 judges decided the other day that there was no grounds for appeal, when clearly the circumstances were that the decision was made, all the evidence was presented at a court case. The decision was made by Baritza, that Julian not to be extradited. Then the United States appeal said the judge didn't take note or didn't seek from us further evidence. I mean, it's absurd. So there isn't any legal system that you can rely on. What we can rely upon is us.
May I quote from the last interview with Julian before he was effectively gagged? It's with Stefania Maurizi, who has written a book, I think it's under translation, about the secret power. Stefania Maurizi, a journalist and friend, colleague of Julian's, she interviewed him just a few days before the measures were taken by the Ecuadorian president to silence him effectively. She asks him, "Do you think you will ever travel the world again as a free man?" And he answers, "It's a matter of culture and politics. In a sense, it's up to public opinion. At a certain level of conflict, all rules and standards break down. You see that in case of the conflict in Iraq, for example, but it is also true for very high-profile legal cases where there is state interest. That is true for me as well. What should be a legal process has turned into a political process. So that's why it's up to public opinion, because my arbitrary detention is a political matter." So it is, we could agree, but there is a huge, it's not only an element, it's sort of the whole base of the case against Assange is political to well, not to a certain extent. It is a political decision. Yeah. But still, we are in the middle of a legal process, and there has been changes recently. John just referred to this rather complicated thing about the judge, Vanessa Baraitser, having over a year ago stopped the extradition process, and there was this appeal by the United States, the prosecutors, and that got actually, it was confirmed in the High Court. And now, where are we now? Could you give us an understandable update on this process?
It's in this theater which they call justice in the process, which is basically another form of the torturous element of the persecution, and we actually do have evidence that has been leaked to us how this process was drawn up in text as the manual to take down Julian Assange and Wikileaks, and that's from the Stratford files, where the chairman of Stratford, the sort of privatized intelligence company, said, well, he should be dragged from courtroom to courtroom for 20 years, and that's exactly what has happened. It is to punish by process. And the only good thing about the process, which has been very costly and of course stressful for Julian to go through, is that it is little by little stripped all the feathers of the chicken, so it stands naked there. You can see through the facade, how obvious it is through the process. So I mean, it's obvious to lay people. People don't need to have a law degree to actually witness that and see that in the entire process. But formally, yes, the Supreme Court has said, no, there is no ground for appeal to the Supreme Court, rejected. It now goes to Priti Patel, who is the Minister of Interior, to rubber stamp the extradition. It will be 4 weeks at a minimum, but after that she could rubber stamp it and actually order his extradition. At that point, Julian can appeal again to, well, not again, that he can appeal to the High Court, the appeal court in London, to present actually his side of the case in the appeal court. But because in the first process it was the Americans who were appealing because they lost. And at that point, this could drag on, but it's not even a certainty that he will be allowed, because you have to apply for an appeal. So this, it's a very precarious situation. When he exhausts his measures in the UK justice system, so-called, of course, there's the option of trying to get a speedy process in the European Court of Human Rights. That is not a given certainty, but it is an option. Usually, under normal circumstances, he would not be extradited while that is being contemplated. But given the political situation, the total disregard that the UK has shown for international commitments, just imagine, I mean, they have destroyed important United Nations mechanisms. The working group on arbitrary detention was totally dismissed. And I even heard in a courtroom, the United Nations ruling do not have any merit in my court, said one judge and threw it away, and actually sentenced Julian to maximum prison term for breaching bail. Usually you pay a fine for breaching bail. 50 weeks. It is basically double what the website said is the sort of baseline for maximum, which is 25 weeks. He got 50 weeks, according to the Book of Law. A couple of weeks earlier, a man on a manslaughter charge, the so-called Thames speedboat killer, fled the country and was extradited from, I think, Czech Republic. He was sentenced to 25 weeks, half the time that Julian. And he had all the elements to show that this was a process that you could easily justify under international conventions of the rights to seek asylum. He was granted asylum. And he was justified in his concerns about being indicted and dragged to the United States. Everybody called him paranoid at the time, even the British press and pretty much everybody. But of course he was right. So I don't have any faith in the justice system, so-called, in the UK. This could happen in a few weeks' time. So we are at a very important time where we need to act. What needs to be done is actually that people mobilize and they speak out and they make themselves heard, and it does work. People like you here are an important part of the fight. It has been, we've seen it elsewhere, that people can have an effect. You can push the politicians to do something. We need more than 10 MPs in Stortinget. We need them all. So, I mean, pick up the phone, write the email, demand that they do something. And importantly as well, talk to the journalists who are avoiding the story, misrepresenting the story, being hostile, but demand that they are objective and actually cover it objectively. It's their colleague. And if they say, well, I'm not interested, not an interesting story, it's in the courtroom, we've written it before, and said, hang on, every major organization and association on this planet that cares about freedom, freedom of speech, press freedom, human rights, has sided with Julia now. Because they know what is important. It's about the freedom of the press. So tell the journalist, it's about you, mate. You're next. So do something about it. And you know, we are getting there. So I haven't lost faith, and John is right. I mean, the wave is rising. We are getting more and more support because people like you do care. People do see the injustice. It's so blatant. It's so naked. Even if the journalists have less intelligence than the little boy who pointed at the emperor and say, he's naked. Many journalists do not see it. They avoid it. They buy into the narrative. Well, we have to have faith in the justice system. Hell no. You do not have a faith in a justice system that has behaved in the manner that the UK justice system has done under the orders, obviously, from the big brother across the pond. That is just not happening. So we have to act. And it is so important because there's so much at stake. It comes to the foundation of all our core values that are spoken about in this day and age, especially where our values are being threatened. Democracy, freedom, human rights. We have a war in our backyard here, and now we have to defend our values, we have to stick together. Well, if the politicians who speak those words care anything about those values, they need to clean house, and you need to make them honor these values. And in the case of Julian Assange, they are all being violated. And if that's allowed to happen, we can basically turn off the lights and forget about it.
Could we pick up on that? And now towards the end, before Q&A, talk a little bit about the scenario that is opening up. On the one hand, for Julian Assange, if he is extradited. On the other hand, for the situation for, well, European or global democracy and press freedom. So on the one side, what is awaiting Julian Assange in the United States if he is extradited? On the other hand, the question would be, what are the consequences for global press freedom? Because this creates a precedent. I don't know which one of you would like to answer which question.
I'll take the first one because I know that it's such a bleak scenario.
Okay.
What will happen to Julian if he's extradited? Well, the magistrate court judge basically spelled it out. His life would be at risk. The condition in the prison system, the measures that will be taken, his health, it could basically lead to his death. And it's not comfortable when you talk about it as a friend and with John here. I mean, of course, we worry. They will put him in pre-trial detention, which means an isolation, 23 hours a day, or 23 and a half, maybe half hour in a garden, alone, no association with any others. That could go on for 2 or 3 years. That is a certainty, and then sentencing for up to these 175 years under similar conditions. I mean, that's what the experts in the United States testified to in the trial in London. But it just cannot come to that. It's because if this is allowed to happen, just imagine this. The sole superpower on this planet has decided that they can hunt down any journalist in any jurisdiction, demand an extradition, and imprison the individual, the journalist, whether he's French or Norwegian, from wherever, bring him to America, put him in jail, if he writes and exposes truthful information that the American administration deems as being contrary to their interest. It is the end of national security journalism. It is supposed to send a signal, don't mess with us. Don't tell the truth about us. We will come after you, and they will. It will only be the beginning of this persecution and mark the end of national security reporting, one of the most important fields of reportage in our world today, where it's so important to keep a check on these endless powers of these states.
Mm. But the reason why the US won the appeal is that they got these assurances from the United States. Well, you said that Vanessa Baraizu, the judge in the magistrate court, barred the extradition because of health issues and the conditions in American prisons.
Well, these so-called assurances are absolutely a laughing matter. I mean, well, there are two sides to this. Imagine the scenario when you lose a case in court and you go to an appeal and said, "Oh, hang on, I got new information that I can actually sort of upgrade my case with this new document. Please take it into account." Usually in appeal court, in normal situation, in court probably here in Norway, I'm pretty sure, if somebody says, well, that's interesting new information, it has to go back the entire case to the lower court then for re-evaluation of the entire thing. It's not that you take in this new document called assurances and say, interesting document. On the basis of this document, we'll reverse the decision. I mean, it's a blatant violation of the rule of law anywhere. Just this procedure. But secondly, the nature of these so-called assurances is absolutely, so ridiculous because it doesn't assure anything. They say, we're not going to send him to Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. Well, hang on. There are plenty of other maximum security prisons in the United States. We will not put him under so-called special administrative measures, SAMs for short. I mean, the Americans love these acronyms. SAMs means torture and total isolation. Of, I think, 50,000 prisoners in the US who are under total isolation, only 600 or 700 are under this special scheme because they have other fancy name for other ways of locking people up and basically bury them in a cell. He can serve in Australia when and if he's sentenced. Well, pre-trial period will take maybe 3 years. And it is impossible to actually apply for serving a sentence in another country, your home country, until you have exhausted all your possibilities of appeals. That could take 10, 15, 20 years. And the icing on the cake, the small print in the assurances, the so-called diplomatic assurances, it said, sort of, in the end, and I'm paraphrasing, but we retain the right to change our mind about these assurances when and if we see something happening that we'll have to take into account and let's just wipe it out. So it's laughable that the court would take such a ridiculous document and actually base the reversal of Baretzer judgment on this single document. One, allowing it. Two, basing on it. You can read the evaluation of this document by Amnesty International, which rarely is sort of strongly outspoken about these issues. I mean, they try to be diplomatic. Amnesty International basically says that this is not worth the paper it's written on. And everybody who looks into it, you can read the assurances, you can see it's so hollow. It's part of the facade.
And perhaps one should add that the organization that has the last word when it comes to these SAMs is the CIA.
The CIA who planned to kidnap or kill Julian Assange, as was reported by Yahoo News by prominent investigative reporters last September. So the individuals that plan to kidnap or assassinate Julian will be the individuals to decide what condition he will be serving under in a United States jail.
Let's end on a lighter note. You are actually starring in a new film, a movie. We were trying to get a screening of it here, but it turned out that it hadn't premiered yet, but it's going to in Australia first, and then perhaps the rest of the world. And it's about you and your fight for Julian. Could you and it's directed by your other son, Gabriel.
He's the producer. The director is Ben Lawrence. Yeah.
Could you tell us?
Oh well, there's one of our supporters. She's in a wheelchair. She's got a disease where she can't speak. She can think and see, but she uses a telephone like that, and it comes up on the telephone talks. Whatever she replies to your question. So I said, Jenny, could you do a review of the film, please? And she said, so nodded her head. Anyway, she got her phone out after the film was over, and she wrote, it is very sad. It's, it's not Ben the director, he just likes to, he's not frightened. And if things are difficult, he doesn't feel the need to make them, to paint them a rosy colour or anything like that. And this game, well, I call it a game from listening post to listening post. How's it go? Play this game of ghosts from listening post to listening post. It's very difficult, and spending. You've only got time in life. I mean, we kid ourselves and all this sort of thing, but all we have is some time. We're here, and it's been now. Julian's now 50. He's been fighting for 12 years. And so that time has been used up. And so I've been at this business for 3 years. So it's used that time of that part of life is gone. It's used up in this fight. So Ben doesn't shy from that fact. And it's he uses me as an example of all of our efforts to bring some sort of justice to Julian Assange. Yeah, and I think that is a sort of truthful statement that a person by themselves, as I'm not young, can't do much, but together we managed to have done something, and that's the point of the film. So in that sense it's uplifting, in some senses because the fight just goes on and on. It's fearful, yeah. But he wanted to end on a lighter note. I don't know how to do this in this matter, but there is. So when you see a tip or your what do you call a mulch where you put your vegetables and all that? What's that called again? Compost. Where you see your compost heap, you're going to see the compost heap as a parallel or analogy for what Julian has been faced with these 13 years. You could see it as rubbish, cast-offs that are rotting away. And then sometimes you go out when the weather warms up a little bit and you see a seed has sprouted and it'll turn into a flower. Well, that's Julian and Stella marrying in a couple of days' time. That love somehow has transcended all of this and become fruitful, and 2 lovely children thereby. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we will be moving on to the Q&A for a couple of minutes. Do we have Jan and a microphone?
Hallo. Mitt navn er Klaus Knag. Jeg har vært rettssikkerhetsaktivist i 20 år. For noen år siden så...
Could you speak in English?
Okay, yes, sorry. A few years ago, I met Julian Assange on a video link and somebody called Holberg Conference. And I would like to address the same questions. I addressed that when those in power have been violating the law doesn't appeal to them. So they redefine the law You have partly addressed this. Julian answered with an example of Germany during the Second World War. They did a lot that was perfectly legal because they had just changed the law. So, and we see the same here in Norway, a number of cases, as long as the judges, when they are in the same position where they've been violating the law, or those in power have been violating the law, they don't understand anything. So it's clearly a big problem anywhere. Just another remark. The courts of human rights have a limit on 10 years for a case. So hopefully, if you get in there, maybe you can try that. Thank you.
Would you answer? Or?
No, he answered his own question, I think. Yes. Yeah.
I think I want to comment maybe, because it was excellent you would point this out, that this is the scary part of what we are seeing more and more of. I think it is the legacy of the post-9/11 world, the darkness that has sort of been slowly and gradually, and in many ways without us noticing, sort of blocked out the sun in our world. And one of this method is this abuse of the law and abuse of the language, and we saw that a lot in the materials we were publishing in 2010 and 11 from the wars, especially how in this Orwellian way the newspeak sort of gets in there, and it's sort of supposed to make us immune and redefine the reality. You all remember when they were torturing prisoners that were kidnapped, even off the streets of Stockholm. They got worried in the Justice Department that this might actually have some effect. So what do? Well, you call the lawyers, and the lawyers said, well, we just have to define it differently. So we called it enhanced interrogation technique. When you waterboard somebody 85 times, as one example was shown in the Guantanamo files, it's enhanced interrogation technique. And you define the reality in a different way, and that you change the law. The collateral murder video, I mean, I'm pretty certain many of you have seen that horrible video, and it's very close to me because prior to the showing that, we traveled to Baghdad, me and my colleague, to actually gather evidence and find the sole survivor of that incident, 2 children. The military said that they had actually done a detailed investigation of that obvious war crime that was taking place there, and defined that incident within the framework of international law and the internal rules of engagement, as they call it. They call killing somebody engaging with somebody. I don't want to be invited to an American engagement party, actually. Come to think of it, but you redefine the reality. You change the law, and in Julian's case, you twist and turn them in this Kafkaesque. I mean, the cliche of Kafkaesque way of presenting things is almost too shallow, because the reality in Julian's case is so huge. I mean, Kafka wouldn't have dreamed of this abuse in the process. So you're right. We do worry about that. I can give you one example if we do have time. How many have you seen the collateral murder video?
Everybody, I would think.
Yeah,
no.
At least part of it. That's good. I mean, when it was published on April 5th, 2010, the Americans said, I mean, it's just an isolated incident. You can't judge the war by that. Lo and behold, a few months later, you had 300,000 documents showing the exact opposite. It was not an isolated incident. It was an everyday occurrence. That was happening every day. And I'll give you one example. We don't have the video evidence, but you have it in print. And it's actually the same helicopters who are north of Baghdad. And for some reason, they are told to actually intercept and engage with a vehicle with some armed individuals on a pickup truck. So they shoot their brilliant 30mm cannons, which have hollow bullets that are like little hand grenades that sort of explode on impact. The same bullets that they used against individuals on the ground, they are designed to penetrate steel in armored vehicle. And people who came upon the scene to see these individuals, they don't recognize bodies. They just see blood and human remains that is hard to piece together. Anyway, they were able to stop the vehicle, and the man on the back of the truck, they throw down their weapons, and they jump off the truck, and they raise their hands up in the air and surrender. So then imagine this, because you've seen and you heard the horrible discussion between the crews in the Apache helicopter gunships, and the callousness and way they interact and laugh about their work and their killings. So they say, well, what do we do now? There are no troops on the ground here anywhere. We can't call anybody to come to the scene. So, okay, let's call headquarters. And so they actually radio up the ground control and describe the situation. We got several individuals who are surrendering here on the ground. What to do? Well, hang on. Keep them pinned down there. Hover over. We'll check with the lawyers. So imagine the situation. Somebody on ground control picks up the phone. Who's on call in duty, in Washington and Pentagon somewhere in headquarters with the legal expertise, and describe the situation. Meanwhile, these guys are standing there, surrendered, and the helicopter crew is over them. After a little while, the lawyer had looked into the rules of law and sort of come to the conclusion and sends the message back, and the headquarters called up the helicopter and say, well, the lawyers have looked into this matter, and according to the rules of law and rules of engagement, you cannot surrender to an aircraft. So smoke them. And they open fire. This is the reality. And it's just like the video game, all right, we'll get extra points. And they were obliterated. And you can imagine this, because we saw the video, but it was a one incident of so many. And I've said this and many others. The collateral murder video is it's iconic in a way that it shows the reality of the Iraq War in a similar way that the napalm girl in Vietnam sort of says everything about the nature of that horrible war. And it will be there forever.
Just
sorry for the long answer.
No, it's fine.
No.
Oh, sorry. Did you want a short comment?
No, I forgot myself.
All right, thanks. My name is Morten. I just want to start by giving you my deepest sympathies. As a father myself, I can imagine how difficult it is to go through this, as you mentioned, Kafka process with your son. So I just wanted to say that. I mean, from following this process, it's been difficult to understand why, as you say, why only 10 members of parliament in Norway is on the Assange side, or even paying attention. Luckily, some of them are from my political party, and I'm happy for that. But I mean, we have more than 10 representatives in the parliament, so I don't understand why the rest of them aren't on it. But I guess my question is, why isn't every journalist writing about this? Why is it? Because I don't read about this in the papers every day in Norway, and I don't read about it in the papers every day in international press. And I mean, if you look at the Ukraine and Russia now, where people are supporting the journalists who are fighting for the true stories, and so why is this case so special? Why I simply don't understand this. And I work a lot with Palestine, and I think almost in a similar way, where people say, well, it's so difficult. This whole case is so difficult, so we don't even want to go into it because they made it difficult, right? But I mean, the journalists and the people the investigative journalists, and why don't they pick this up? Why don't they write about it in the papers every day? Because it's their case as well. So I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Thanks.
It's an immense question.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it falls on my lap, because I've been a journalist for more than 30 years, and so I've been inside the beast, and I know its entrails, like the man said. Just imagine the scenario. Niels Meltzer was right. The project Assange, as a mobbing project to deprive him of all dignity, and basically was so effective, and you use the media, and it's easy to manipulate the media into compliance with going along. It went on for years and years, and in 3 years ago, on April 11th, when Julian was taken out of the embassy from his asylum, at that point they had almost managed to create an image of Julian that was almost obscenely absurd, because it didn't match in reality. He was almost depicted as a subhuman individual, and everybody played along. On that day, or the day after, Lenin Moreno, the despicable president of Ecuador, who sold basically Julian Assange out for a few $1 billion in IMF loans, and that's very well established. He was allowed 15-minute slot on BBC where he ranted on, slandering Julian, who had just been arrested. It was the most despicable. He did not get a single critical question. It was just like, so, Mr. Moreno, what do you want to say about Julian Assange? Go on, and just one did back in the days have some reverence or sort of belief that BBC would do the, at least, pretend to do critical journalism. Nothing of that sort. And there is a herd mentality in journalism. And they are herds like more than many other animals, actually. So I mean, they will just follow the others. There are very few brave journalists who actually will go against the tide, and they are actually getting fewer and fewer. That's very worrying. Because they all go to the one direction. If a few of them lead, everybody else will run in that direction. Very few will go in the other direction. There was a brave Australian journalist that actually made one of the most important stories of latter times, who actually decided to not go as all the other thousands journalists in Japan for the surrender ceremony in Japan. He did go to the city of Hiroshima and reported, actually managed to get a front-page story in an English newspaper. I write this as a warning to the world. He was the other 3,000-something journalists were taking photo ops of the Japanese emperor signing the surrender. At that time, the scientific reporter of the New York Times was writing pieces about the ridiculous claim there was any such thing as radiation poisoning. It didn't exist. He was the science editor of the New York Times, and it later emerged that he was being paid directly by the Pentagon. So this is the reality, and it's still going on. Very few journalists are brave enough to actually report the truth and do proper work. It's a sad reality. And that's where you come in, and because you can demand them that they do their job, as you can demand that the politicians take interest. I mean, you have probably a phone number of your party members, Ask this question to them. Why aren't you all in the Assange committee? Why don't you do more? Or you can give me the phone number and I can call them. But it's more effective if you do it.
I think we will take the last question, and hopefully it is for John.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, thank you so much for being here and for not letting us forget, because I think this is so important. As someone who's followed this whole case of Julian for a long time, I'm actually, at times, I've had to stop following it because it was so upsetting. As an academic lawyer and ethicist, my deepest apologies that we haven't managed to achieve more and get more of an impact on this whole case. And my heart goes out to you, John especially, and everyone who knows Julian personally, and to Julian himself, of course, for experiencing this huge injustice. And my concrete question to you would be, and I guess this is also something to Kristinn as well, who has just hinted at it, is like, what can we do? I mean, I would love to do more to help, and I understand like expressions of solidarity and donations of money are one thing, but Gisle, I've seen you've been way more active recently in Norwegian press, which is great, I think. But what can we do? What more can we do to bring this to the attention of the people that matter? And how can we help Julian, but not just Julian, but also that everything that Julian stands for? And I'd love to get some directions from you, because yes, I'm all in, but I just don't know what to do.
Thanks. You speak well and quickly. Sorry. I don't speak so quickly, but well, Norway has got a very powerful sword that it can draw and strike a blow for Julian. You call it the Nobel Peace Prize. That's one. The committee responds to the concerns of the Norwegians. The next one is in my country, the Assange group of 30 is cross-party. And being a cross-party group, it sort of brings about a reform, because party politics divides everybody up. It brings about a reform of the parliamentary method. The parliamentary method has this wonderful charm in as much as that the parliamentarians take their concerns into Parliament, into the sovereign majesty of Parliament, and the sovereign majesty of Parliament insists that the executive act upon those concerns. The phenomenon of Julian in my country and in other national assemblies, in particular, I'm thinking of the National Assembly of France, is a cross-party group, 40. They had a debate for an hour in their National Assembly on whether to give Julian asylum. It's a really important phenomenon that a cross-party group debated for an hour without the whip from either party on a matter of general concern to the constituents that they act for, and they took that matter into Parliament and used the sovereign majesty of Parliament to bring their concerns to the executive. And the executive must act as Parliament has sovereign majesty. Now, what has developed over the years, of course, is that everybody, all of the institutions and corporations, are envious of Parliament's sovereign majesty and subordinate for their own purposes. But a reform has happened around the concern for Julian Assange and the iconographic circumstances that surround Julian. It's a monster case and a global case of the collapse of the rule of law and the suborning of institutions for particular purposes. So that's what you can do, is just advocate, not just, but advocate to your parliamentarians and political institutions that it's in their interests to bring this matter into Parliament, for it enforces and gives strength to Parliament itself. Many times you see in the European theatre that the EU, in its so-called wisdom, asks Parliament, national parliaments, to devolve themselves of power and hand that power over to the EU. Well, in the case of Julian, you've seen the opposite direction, that Parliament retains its power and exercises that power to its own benefit and to the benefit of the constituents that make up that polity. They're very, very good things, marvellous things that Julian's circumstances have conjured up, as we've spoken of here tonight. And that's the last one. And I think it's becoming very effective as those supranational institutions constantly fail to uphold the laws which went to create them. So we have just quickly, a run across them. In 1945, the war ended after 100 million people, and every nation most nations in the world except the United States destroyed. The people of the world gathered together in a historical moment and brought about the United Nations. The first president of the United Nations was an Australian, Herbert Vere Everett, and coming from a small country, influenced the structure of the United States so that it favoured somewhat smaller countries. In fact, in the UNGA, they have a voting system. Okay. In 1948 came about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that was embedded in the laws of the United Nations. In 1958 came about the Conventions of Asylum, which were ratified, again under the authorship of Australia in 1973-74 by the United Nations General Assembly, in a vote which only had 16 abstentions and nobody voted against it. A marvellous circumstance. Those great, magnificent civil artefacts that have been abandoned since 2001 to preference a war on terror, which has no rule laws. It just has impulsive actions, and it causes us to have to abandon our sense of understanding that there are laws there to guide the interests of nation states so that they won't burst into conflict.
I'm afraid we have to end there. I think the technician is working overtime. So yeah, we have to end there. Perhaps we could stay here 5 minutes afterwards.
I just want a final word, one sentence. Really thank you for coming here. I really appreciate it. And you are the force. You are the people who can actually bring forth a change, and you can.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
I wish to thank the Bergen House of Literature for funding this, and the Western branch of Norwegian Pen, and especially you two for taking the train from Oslo to Bergen and being here with us.
A marvellous journey, and good to see you.